forefathers, as an Apache person, Geronimo had a great sacrilegious act in the form of the U.S. Army and folks affiliated with Skull and Bones, secret society within Yale University, desecrating Geronimo's grave and taking the skull and femur bones back to Yale University's Skull and Bones tomb. And if that's not wild enough, allegedly they have, the skulls of dozens of other notable people from history.
Hello and welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. Today we are joined by Mark Steeves, the host of the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast, and he joins us to talk about his research into the strangeness of his hometown in New Haven and the greater New England area. This is an interesting discussion and we go in a number of different directions. We get into the Skull and Bone Society and what they have to do with Geronimo. We get into the Saturnian and Egyptian architecture that is prevalent in New Haven. We discuss ancient America, hidden history, and so much more. In the Plus show, we go in more directions, including giants in native folklore. So that sounds like your bank and you'd like to listen to the Plus show, then just follow the links below and come join us on the Patreon. Now, it would be remiss of me not to mention my new book, which is now out in both the UK and Europe and in the US. So if you're interested in some of the Dark Man research that you might have heard on the show, then do check out my book, Song of the Dark Man, available in all good bookstores. Okay, that's it for me. Let's get on with the show. So, Mark Steeves, it's very, very cool to have you on the Spirit Box. You're really welcome. I've been a fan of your show. My family thinks I'm crazy for some time now, and you were very kind to welcome me on your show recently, talk about my book. So, I'm delighted to return the favor and welcome you to the Spirit Box.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it is we don't have to reiterate it for folks who listen to our interview together, but yeah, it was synchronistic the way it all transpired. You sent me, or your publisher sent me your book, and then you sent me a message within the same week, and it was very cool to see that. That to me is a sign, and I like to follow those signs with my podcast, and it's partly how I became Mystic Mark and got into all this stuff, with the podcast. It's following my intuition, following the synchronicities, and trusting my gut, and never being afraid to turn over these dusty stones and see what's underneath them.
Awesome. So to help orientate people and give them a sense of who you are and kind of your areas of interest, could you tell the people a little bit how you got into this area of the internet that we populate?
Yeah, so it started when I was younger, and I've just always been interested in strange things, from cryptids and UFOs, and those are sort of more on the periphery and the front view for young people growing up in America, I think. And the ghosts and the haunted kind of stuff, I was a little too scared when I was a kid to get involved in all that. But I was interested. And then as I got older, I started to learn more and more and more. And um, one day, as it were, I found, I think the first time I really got into like an audio podcast, it was through the Joseph Campbell lecture series.
Okay.
I'd never listened to podcasts before that, and that's not really even a podcast, but Spotify. I don't know if Spotify had podcasts back then, but they had these like lecture series and audiobooks and things like that. And I listened to the whole thing, and it was just very fascinating, and became quickly, we'll call it, addicted to listening to stuff and learning. And I realized, oh, wow, I'm getting paid at the time I was washing dishes. It was a very short-lived venture for me. But at the time, I realized, oh, I can get paid to learn because I had just dropped out of college, and it wasn't for me. Community college wasn't really appropriate for, I think, my level of understanding. It was like it kind of felt like high school all over again.
Right.
So I was just very un prepared and unorganized when it came to like planning where I would go to college. So I just kind of dropped out. But one of the things that did stick with me going to community college right outside of Yale University in the city of New Haven, Connecticut, was the architecture and the vibration, the feeling of this city. You know, the bad and the good, the crime and the opulence, you know, all of it sort of blended together in this really neat and interesting way. And I would walk around, and at first I would look for graffiti, and then I started to look for grotesques. And that's when I really started to kind of notice the occult, right? Because
Right.
for people who don't know, grotesques are like basically you'd maybe call them gargoyles. That's maybe a
Mhm.
less accurate term, but grotesques is any type of like masonry art carved into a building. Sometimes it's like embezzle or a beveled, you know, a beveled kind of
Mhm.
design. Or other times it's you know carved in,
Right.
but and it can be really ornate, like an entire statue coming out of a building, or a
Mhm.
gargoyle spitting water out, helping the water, you know, fall off the building in a efficient way. So yeah, I started noticing all these little things, and it all started adding up. In this really neat way. And then when I found podcasting, the two kind of merged into one, because all
Right.
of these things that I just sensed intuitively, I found an outlet for it. You know, I'd known about conspiracy theories and the paranormal and all this strange stuff, and I had read a few books and found some really compelling stuff in the form of books, but podcasts really just brought that to life. Like in the same way, you know, you and I, when I read
Yeah.
your book and then I speak to you, it's totally different experience, you know, and
Mhm.
to have both of those paired experiences is really, I'm really grateful for. It's partly why I'm so flabbergasted that I found this job, you know, podcasting, because when I was younger, I had no clue that folks like you existed, you know, writing
Yeah.
books and podcasting. Like I honestly just took all these books as like, oh, these guys must be like grandpas old in some like, you know, far away library writing this.
Yeah.
And it's funny because now I have talked to some of these people like Dr. Joseph Farrell, you know, who his book was one of the first books I ever really like, Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men. I found that book, and it was so baffling, the combination of those words, genes, giants, monsters, and men. I was like, what could this be about? And yeah, so I don't want to go and ramble. I hope I'm not too disjointed here, but I'll sum it all up by saying I've had a few really strange experiences in the form of synchronicity and following my intuition. And the one that I'll say is sort of like a highlight, and I've talked about it plenty of times on podcasts before, so I'll keep it just to the brief
Sure.
part of it. But I met a gentleman one day in New Haven, in the center of New Haven, which later I found out has all this geomantic significance. I met this person who saw me smoking a joint, wearing a shirt with Sitting Bull on it, Chief Sitting Bull.
Right.
And this gentleman happened to be Native American, so he saw my shirt and sparked a conversation with me, and we became friends. And later, I learned that he moved to New Haven from Arizona, from a completely different landscape, completely different culture, because one of his ancestors, as an Apache person, Geronimo, had
Wow.
suffered a great sacrilegious act in the form of uh, the U.S. Army and folks affiliated with Skull and Bones, a secret society within Yale University, desecrating Geronimo's grave and taking the skull and femur bones back to Yale University's Skull and Bones tomb. Um, and if that's not wild enough, allegedly they have, the skulls of dozens of other notable people from history. Uh,
Really?
yeah, I mean, I can pull up a list and we can name, I could go through some of the names later. But when I found this out, as somebody who, grew up with family friends who are Native American, and I'd always had a sort of understanding of Native Americans through the limited education we were given in school, like, oh well, there was the pilgrims, and they, shook hands and learned about planting corn and turkey from the Native Americans, and then they gave them smallpox, right? Like that's
Yeah.
all we really learned. So when I found this out, I was like, oh wow, there's a whole story here. There's something more, because you don't just take somebody's skull and femur bones for no reason, right?
Sure, sure.
There's a whole background there. But learning that was really startling. And then learning how Amos dealt with that was even more startling, but also very inspiring. He was homeless, and he left everything behind in Arizona in order to right his past wrongs and make peace with himself, so to speak. He thought, I should go to New Haven and pray for Geronimo's spirit. And
Right.
he learned about this story and felt compelled to do so. So every day at noon, he would walk over to the tomb on High Street within Yale University's campus. It's relatively open to the public. You can walk throughout most parts of the campus.
Okay.
Um, and he would stand in front of the tomb and scream Geronimo's name every day at noon for a period of time. And whether that helped him or helped Geronimo, I don't know the details of it, but I will say, as time has gone on, Amos is no longer homeless. He has a home, a car, a job. So he did something right there, spiritually. And, it's funny, the name of my podcast, My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, that was probably one of the first times my family really thought I was crazy, when I came home and told them, hey, I made friends with a homeless guy who told me all about Geronimo's skull in Yale University. And, little did I know that my own father had actually been in that tomb, not through any affiliation to the group at all, but
Sure.
because he worked at for a local utilities company. So he would go inside of the campus for various reasons, for that utility,
Mhm.
repair purpose. So he had told me, oh yeah, I've been in the tunnels underneath that one.
Wow,
Later
really?
on in life. Yeah, a
Yeah.
couple years ago, actually, after I
Yeah.
got the podcast going. Now they're all kind of a little bit more interested in talking to me about this kind of stuff, because they see it's panning out, and it's,
Yeah.
they're not encouraging bad behavior by
Mhm.
indulging me. So yeah, but in the past I was very much like, you know imbued with this huge sense of curiosity, like what have I stumbled across?
Mhm.
um, and life is really serendipitous, because it turns out that, I think most people who've heard about the Geronimo skull know that George H.W. Bush was involved in that.
Mhm.
His father, Prescott Bush, stole Geronimo's grave. George H.W. Bush, famously, president of the United States, his son, also president of the United States, and all three of those men, father, son, and grandson, were all part of Skull and Bones. Now, as that connects to my life in a strange way, my great grandmother danced with George H.W. Bush at a local ball, because, I'm
No
from the
way.
area in New Haven. So it's very kind of interesting to me learning about all this stuff in hindsight years later,
Right.
because I was in George H.W. Bush's home the day he died. Now let me backtrack. Okay, I wasn't.
Wow.
Let me backtrack. I was in his former home,
Right,
right? So
okay, okay.
I wasn't in the building that he actually became deceased in.
Right,
But
okay.
what was odd was I was doing my regular Tuesday delivery. I worked for a bakery at the time, and the bakery had contracts with Yale University. So we would deliver pastries to their various, school buildings, and
Mhm.
bread to their cafeterias, and so on. So every Tuesday, I'd go to the Yale Department of Economics with pastries and coffee. And that morning, I drop off this stuff and I look at the Yale campus newspaper on my way out, and it says George H.W. Bush, former resident of New Haven, Connecticut, Yale alumni. And then it listed his former address, 88 Hill House Avenue, which was the exact address that I was standing at. So
Wow.
every Tuesday, I didn't know this, but I had been going into his former home to deliver these pastries, right? They had turned it into an economics department now. Go
Right.
figure. But yeah, it was just very odd, the threads that all kind of trace that. And when I was delivering bakery goods, I was not a podcaster yet, but I was listening to podcasts every shift for
Hmm.
6 hours a shift or however long, really becoming obsessed with it and thinking to myself, like, why am I not doing this myself? And
Right. Yeah.
one thing led to another, and I eventually have my own podcast now, and I think it was kind of meant to be because a long time ago, before I even knew what podcasts were, I would talk to my friends about this stuff until they were, like this. All right, Mark, that's enough. So now I have a welcome audience of people who are
Yeah.
interested in all this. But yeah, it's kind of fun for me to look back and be like, oh wow, okay, yeah, if I didn't do that and I didn't do that, maybe that wouldn't have happened. But
Hmm.
in the interim of having this podcast, I've had the freedom to go and do that research that I was only just kind of like
Dipping into.
tantalized by.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was working, I didn't have the time to really fully dive into this stuff. But I would see it as a delivery guy, especially within Yale. I would see kind of strange things going on, not just on the buildings themselves, but with the actual employees and students and things. Because I
Mhm.
was there between the hours of 3 a.m. and 8 a.m. So it's not
Right.
exactly
Right. Right. Right.
common time to be on campus. So there I am delivering my baked goods and just being like a keen observer of like, all right, what's going on, right?
Mm.
And yeah, that's led to some cool insights. And now I do a tour for people who reach out to me. It's more of a personal kind of one-on-one
Yeah.
or with a small group, but I'll point out all the strange buildings and essentially what I think is like a type of geomantic theurgy,
Right.
where they're using architectural symbols and landscape symbols to almost create like a recipe. And that recipe will, in the right conditions, during the right astrological
Hmm.
circumstances, be like this, souffle that will waft the smell up to the gods, and then the gods will
Yeah. Yeah.
come down and from what I've ascertained, New Haven has this Saturnian energy,
Okay. Well, that explains Skull and Bones. Yeah.
right? And so many other strange things going on. Skull and Bones is one of 8 secret societies called the Ancient Eight at Yale University,
Wow. I
and
didn't know that.
yeah, and there's 30 others beyond the original 8. So there's a lot of secret societies. None of them are as established as the original 8, but it's very strange stuff. Excuse
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. No, it's there's a lot of that in London as well. Like when you walk around some of the older areas of London, like the some of the buildings are absolutely full of it. Like statues of Hermes on top of buildings, like Caduceus's on the sides like there. I think it's the Welcome collection, that building near King's Cross. It's got like the Eye of Horus over the door, and like
Right.
Caduceus's, like the design for the outside lights has a Caduceus on top of it, right?
Mm.
Or Caduceus and the lights on top of it. Stuff like that. And it does take a certain amount of, I guess, being able to read the symbolic language, you know, to figure out that, well, that's kind of a striking feature, that kind of that sets it apart. There's one cool thing actually. Let me dig this up 1 second. There's a town called little city called Bath, um, in the southwest of England.
Uh-huh.
Let me grab this up. And
And as you look that up, I'll just say quickly, Hermes is also theurgistically, symbolically ascertained through some of Yale's architecture. He's seen in several different places. This Hermes
Okay.
energy for sure is present with
Yeah.
Book and Snake is like the Skull and Bones counterpart. And it's funny because BSSB, and they're on opposite ends of the same block. It's
Right.
very much like a, tit for tat, Zamat and Tomax type of thing,
Right. Okay. Cool. Cool. Let me share my screen with you. So Bath is designed by a guy called John Wood, John Wood Senior, um, Richard Bonash, and Ralph Allen. I'm glad I looked that up because I've been saying it was Christopher Wren for a while, which is completely wrong. But let me show you the city layout. Because the guy who designed it was like apparently from a Freemason order. And if you see here, can you see that? Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the city layout. Down here, there's the Roman baths, which are a really cool place. But up here, you've got the Royal Crescent, and that's the crescent moon. That leads down here to the circus, which is the sun. I'll zoom in a bit here, and that goes down to Queen Square, and that makes a key. So
Oh,
you've got
wow.
this key in the landscape, and in the circus, I mean, it's a really beautiful city actually. In the circus, this is it. It's really ornate, really beautiful. All along the outside of these buildings, just to kind of around here, you can see some of them there. I don't know if I can zoom in on that, but they've got all these kind of really interesting, like just strange architecture, the architecture
Now, those would
decorations.
be those would be grotesques. That would
Yeah.
be the architectural name for
Right.
anything
Okay.
like that.
Yeah. There's absolutely heaps of them, and then if we go back out to the Royal Crescent, like this, it's a very kind of tourist friendly city. It's beautiful. This is the Royal Crescent,
Oh wow.
um, and if I remember correctly, like Nick Cage or Johnny Depp owns one of these. Yeah, which is
Okay.
kind of cool. Anyway, but yeah, that kind of cityscape stuff I find really intriguing. That that because you mostly think that cities are kind of just designed, they kind of grew organically, um and then in periods of like when the cities burnt down and that kind of stuff, they were rebuilt and city town planned. But like that's quite specific that it has like the present moon, the sun, and a key all laid out specifically for kind of some esoteric meaning. I don't know what it is, but it's quite interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is the case with New Haven. In fact, we have, and I'll show you if I can share my screen here. Um, we have a sort of entire city organically growing
Right,
around 9 squares. Now, when it comes to the gematria, I'm not exactly an expert, but it's an important part of Kabbalistic magic is this, using numbers and their assigned characters or letters.
right,
So there is something to this. This is kind of a abstract view of the streets and the land here in New Haven, but I'm going to just zoom in to the 9 square. So this is the 9 square. I'm almost certain right there is
right,
the 9 square. Um, and the whole city has grown around this location here. This square in the center was built to be exactly enough area or space, by yard to fit 144,000 people standing shoulder to shoulder, I think and that according to the Bible is how many people will be saved during the last judgment, right? Is
oh wow,
104,000 souls. So New Haven, it's America's first planned city. 9 square grids and I can find. I'm going to find a better picture here for us to look at. But the 9 squares with 3 churches all facing the east, right at the center. And it's kind of interesting because banking, insurance, um, the military industrial complex, espionage, the oil industry. I could go on and on.
Right.
Plastics. These are all connected to New Haven, Connecticut in some way, shape, or form,
Wow.
particularly the military industrial complex, because the helicopter and the submarine were both invented within a few miles from this area. So
Wow.
so if you think about how the United States has conquered the world
Mm,
with by land, sea, and
mm,
air, right?
mhm,
And like
mhm.
the sea being kind of the most important one,
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
and submarines. If
Mhm,
without those, would we have had the Cold War?
mhm,
Like this is a very pivotal point in human history. It was the invention of some of these things. So there's a pronounced potency that New Haven has as an influence. The first English dictionary was even written by somebody from New Haven, or American English, excuse me,
mhm,
American English. But yeah, there's a ton of strange stuff. And earlier you mentioned the similarities of what's going on over there in England or the UK, even France and um, Germany have geomantically sort of aligned cities and whatnot. But when it comes to New Haven, it was explicitly inspired by, well, Freemasonry. But when it comes to what we're about to talk about, it was explicitly inspired by Paris and
okay.
their gardens in Paris. So what we have here, and I'm about to show you the gate of it, is America's first planned cemetery. It's the first cemetery of its kind um, in the United States. Obviously, people had died way before this thing was built, so
Mhm.
there were burial grounds and whatnot. But at the time, New Haven was burying all their dead behind the 3 churches in the center of town, and this was
Right.
becoming kind of a nuisance. Dogs would dig up old bones and parade around the streets with corpses. It's like
Yeah,
it was becoming a health hazard. So the wealthy had their ancestors exhumed and buried in what would become kind of like the trend or the norm now, which is a cemetery where everybody has their own plot lined out.
yeah,
Without or without a headstone, you have your own space. And then, of course, the more money you put into your afterlife, the more opulent your headstone is.
sure.
And this cemeteries full of huge, ornate headstones. Not as crazy as what you might see in places like New York City now, where they have these giant sprawling cemeteries with big mausoleums and all this stuff. No, this is a little smaller than that because it is so old. But for
Right.
the time, it's kind of like the innovator. It's the original, and at the gates of this cemetery is this brownstone gate designed by Henry Austin, and it was modeled after these illustrations that came back from Napoleon's scientific expedition into Egypt.
Yeah.
So this was built during the Egyptomania phase of America, and as you can see up top, you have uh, and the name is escaping me right now, but the 2 snakes coming out of the sun with the wings behind it has a proper name. I'm forgetting it. Um, you might know it,
I
Doc.
think I think it's something to do with Horus.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The winged sun disk of Horus is I think what most people call it, but it probably has like a Egyptian name as well. And then underneath it says the dead shall be raised, which to the average Christian churchgoer, seeing that is a little bit like, huh? I thought resurrection, I thought Jesus was the only person that thought we go to heaven, right? What do
Yeah,
you
yeah,
mean
yeah, yeah.
shall be raised? So there's this sort of apocalyptic hinting going on there,
Mhm.
where again, like New Haven being built in the proportions to take 144,000 souls standing shoulder to shoulder.
So
That's,
interesting.
you know, they're
Mm.
doing it again, almost 200 years later after New Haven's been established, and after Yale has founded and become something. This cemetery was post Yale University. Um, because Yale University is older than the United States. It was founded in 1701. It was actually a part of the original founders of New Haven's vision to create a school for Christians in this area, and we had this sort of like enlightened vision of God's hand coming down from the clouds with the compass, right, which is a very Masonic
Mm-hmm.
symbol there. And there's a drawing. I could probably find it and share it with you for you to see. There's a wood carving of New Haven's sort of plan, and it's exactly as I just described, a hand reaching down, kind of like doing the compass, and then you have a snake, the Ouroboros, as the
Right.
frame of the entire thing, and then you have the nine square on the ground with two mountains, which is accurate. New Haven has two small red trap rock mountain ranges on either side of it, and this is very symbolic. There's also two rivers that run, create a little alluvial plain in between. That's where New Haven was built. So, in that sense, it's a very symbolic setting for a city like New Haven.
Okay.
Uh, you have this sort of Solomonic geomancy going on with the nine squares. The Temple of Solomon was divided into nine uh, equal proportions. And then on top of that, I'm going to pull this little slide up for you to see real quick. You have almost all, but most of the Ivy League schools here in the United States on the same line,
Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
straight line between Harvard, Yale, the King's
Yeah.
College, known as Columbia, Rutgers, which is the Queen's College, Princeton, and then of course UPenn. All of these
Mm.
schools are at the heart of American elite culture.
Right.
This is all connected, and all connected to the military industrial complex, of course. But one of the things that, obviously Yale is best known for with Skull and Bones and all of their obvious connections to not only just the military industrial complex in general, but like funding Hitler during World War II and maybe funding the Spanish American War and all these
Right.
other events in history that Yale's had their dirty hands in. They're still proud of the communist revolution in China. They take
Wow.
credit for it, So like, and think about how many people died in
Oh,
that.
yeah, it was 70 million was something
Yeah.
like that. It's an insane
And
figure.
Yale boasts about that of what an intellectual achievement that was, right?
Fucking
So,
hell.
and when you look at the actual landscape of where these kids are going to school, they're going to school on a campus which spine is a corpse road. So you might
Wow.
know about
Okay.
this, Dara. So in England, the tradition goes that in between the church and the cemetery is a corpse road, right? And right across the street from the Skull and Bones tomb, right down here, if you can see my
Yeah.
cursor, is the original church or chapel that they built for Yale University. It was called the Battelle Chapel, and now it is a library, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, this road goes straight to the new cemetery.
Wow.
To think that the ancient burying ground, which is right here behind the three churches, I like to think that those ghosts drift through the old campus on their way to party with the other souls over here in the cemetery. So this whole little area of Yale University is kind of haunted. And then on top of all that, the Farmington River Canal, which was a canal that connected Long Island Sound all the way up with the northern part of the state, the Connecticut River, this
Right.
big, huge canal that they tried to create and eventually gave up on. I think that's I'm misspeaking. It was operational, but eventually it became obsolete
Hmm.
because highways, trains, etc. But yeah, so the canal water has this very you know like ephemeral quality with pulling strange energies and
Right.
displacing them, right? Especially the underworld, the dead. So the canal being right there on this sort of same line of symmetry with all that is interesting to me. And then also the Yale power station, which is a state of the art power station. It would keep the entire campus going if the rest of the state had some kind of
Outage.
blackout.
Right. Okay.
Yes, some sort of big issue. Yale's power station is yeah, really it's a strange thing. And also there's again right next to the cemetery, this power station, right? Like, what's going on there? So a lot of, for me, intuitive sort of senses,
Mm,
not a lot of like concrete, like, oh, they built this power station and then they said, oh, we're going to use the souls of the dead to like I haven't found anything like that that's
yeah.
like explicitly stating that they're spooky, but you just get the sense that that's what's going on here for sure.
I mean, there's an awful lot to be said for intuition, and that kind of thing. Um, I know a lot of people. I think in the '90s or thereabout, were doing things like psychic, um, psychic quests and psychic archaeology. Were visiting these sites and kind of seeing what was coming to them. And I can't give any examples off the top of my head because the gentleman who was explaining this to me, Nat Clegg, he did loads of it in the kind of like I think it was the '90s and early noughties. We had a few drinks, so I can't really remember any examples coherently. But it was really interesting to hear. They were like exploring kind of like Avesbury Stone Circle and this kind of stuff, but doing it from like a psychic perspective. And it might be an interesting kind of might be worth looking into and kind of exploring the area from that perspective and seeing what comes up.
Absolutely. Yeah, I I have a few people come into mind as you describe that because it is something I've looked into. And there's an author whose book I'm trying to locate on my shelf right now, who's written a bunch of really great books on the topic. Um, Shoot, where's his book? Oh, Paul Devereaux. That's who came to mind
Okay,
when
I've
I.
heard of him. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, maybe he's done something. He had a project called the Dragon Lines Project or something like that,
Right. Okay.
and they were taking psychics to significant landscape areas and
Oh,
using other sorts of test equipment. To paraphrasing, I don't think that's specifically what they were doing, but to bring it back to New Haven, I intuitively just felt
mm,
like there's something about this, and I was kind of off the top of my head telling you some of like New Haven's firsts. Well, here's the first. So here's the official list. The
yeah.
submarine was invented by Yale student David Bushnell. Okay, so and that was in 1776. He invented it to fight the British. It was like
Okay.
a it was like literally a barrel with like a telescope or a periscope in the top of it, and he just floated down the river in like a barrel. It's very, yeah, it's, if you look it up, it's very funny to think that became the submarine. But now there's a huge submarine base in Connecticut.
Right.
It's definitely not just like a
Hmm.
ideological origin. There's a physical origin too.
Right.
But John Fitch, he built the first steamboat. He was a New Haven inventor, and I believe went to Yale University. Samuel Colt invented the automatic revolver in New Haven. Think about how much that's changed the world.
Oh God, yeah.
Charles Goodyear discovered the process of vulcanizing rubber and later perfected it.
Hmm.
Charles Goodyear is a New Havenite, and It's kind of funny to me that the only company that still has a blimp or is known for using blimps makes tires. Nobody
Mm.
else has blimps anymore. It's just the tire company. I wonder why. Uh, Philos Blake invented the corkscrew for all the winos.
God
Uh,
bless them.
New Haven also hosted the first telephone switchboard office. So telecommunications, essentially. And I know there are other people might have other like inventions that'll be like, oh, well, actually, it happened in Philadelphia. Actually, it
Right, right.
happened in Baltimore, Maryland. It happened in a lot of places simultaneously. But AT&T, which was originally the Southern New England Telephone Company, was New Haven's first, or the world's first, telephone exchange and telephone directory. Um, and I could just keep going on and on. The lollipop was invented in New Haven. The frisbee, the hamburger. Technically, there are people who argue that the hamburger is from other places because, I mean, how do you invent a beef sandwich, right? Like it's beef. People probably put it on bread in the past, but yeah, the hamburger technically is
I've
from
been telling people it's from Hamburg in Germany.
no, no. I think it was named that because they were Germans from Hamburg. But yeah,
Ah, gotcha, gotcha, gotcha.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
it was invented. I think during the time pre World War One,
Hmm.
and there was a lot of Germans in America in that time. So it was, and even still to this day, I mean, they're basically Americans now. But
Mm.
yeah, um, and just all kinds of strange stuff. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's also one of the first American conspiracy theorists from New Haven, a gentleman by the name of here. Where's his name? He's got a really neat name, like a biblical kind of name. Yeah, Jedediah Morse, the father of American geography and also the father of the inventor of the Morse code. And he
Wow.
was like one of America's first conspiracy theorists. He was trying to warn everybody about the Illuminati having taken over the federal or the government in Washington
Right,
D.C. And this was before the federal government, so he
right,
was
right. Yeah,
possibly onto something there.
yeah.
But yeah,
Uh,
it's a who's who of strange people from New Haven, and very influential
Fantastic.
at that.
I love those names. We don't have those names at all in Ireland. Like those kind of like Jebediah and like Nathaniel, that kind of stuff. Like
You didn't get
uh,
any of what is that too
I
Protestant for you
I
guys?
think it's fairly, yeah. I mean, I think there's probably a few like prods rocking the odd Jebediah and what have you. But yeah, those names don't come up at all. They're very rare.
All
You know.
John, Paul, Matthew,
Well,
Thomas.
I mean, most of the biblical names are really straightforward. Michael,
Right,
that
right.
that's it. Like, but I mean, in terms of names, like we've got obviously all our unpronounceable Irish names that
Oh
do
well,
not
yeah.
sound like they look like. You know,
Well,
that's
God
that's how.
bless you for retaining the culture while so many others were squashed under the Catholic Church. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. But between the church and kind of the British Empire, the culture got a kicking. It really did.
yeah,
But there's been a real resurgence and stuff. Like the Irish language is really coming back. People are really looking into it. And I've been learning Irish again for about a year and a half now because being able to read some of the original folklore in Irish, like
hmm,
some of the in Gaelic, right? So some of the meanings of the words are
hmm,
like they're very different and they give you kind of a bit more of a clue to what's going on. Like things like the names for animals and insects. So like um wolf, for example, is Mocktir, which means like son of the land. Like really different meaning. And a what type of owl is it? I can't remember exactly what type of owl it is. Um but it's called Relic Screelog, which means graveyard screamer, right?
okay,
That's the
yeah,
name for an owl, right? Like
yeah,
fucking, it really kind of gives you a
yeah, on
sense
the
of
nose,
yeah, totally, totally about
on
like
the
how,
beak.
yeah. But a lot of that stuff, like things like like the word banshee.
Hmm.
So Fan means woman, she means fairy. So it literally means fairy woman.
Oh,
That's what it translates as. So
okay.
it's you start to be able to kind of understand a little
Yeah.
bit. You strip back a layer that gets you closer to the original meaning. So that kind of
Yeah.
stuff's really important. But like you're like I would wager if going back to it, your friend, the Native American chap, and who was there to kind of do that, I guess that ancestral healing thing with Geronimo. I would wager if you could get the names of how the landscape was described by the original people, you'd get clues to maybe some of the energetic currents that were in the land
Mm,
already. You know,
yeah.
yeah, be
Yeah,
interesting to see.
that's something that I have uh attempted. It's not easy
Oh, sure, yeah, very
to learn
difficult.
like these languages that are,
Mm,
you know, they've been altered by time so much
mm,
because a lot of the tribes, the original tribes that named some of these places, they don't exist in the same way,
sure.
and their names for things have been kind of translated, changed over time. But yeah,
Mm,
no, it's
mm,
something that I definitely
mm,
appreciate. And
mm,
when it comes to New Haven, the Native Americans say that one of the mountains that's right on the western side of town,
mhm.
they say that that's the body of a giant, and that this
Oh,
giant
okay. Wow.
fought
Okay.
a thunderbird and died and became a mountain of stone,
Mm,
and his brother is down the other like a few miles away, and that mountain is even more like a giant, and it's called
mm,
Sleeping Giant. They actually call it Sleeping Giant because
okay.
you're driving up to it from a mile or a couple miles away, and you're like, whoa, it really does look like a man lying on his back. There's like a little head
Right.
coming
Right.
in to where the neck would be, and then the
Mhm.
chest, and it kind of dips again, and it just looks just like
That's really cool.
the what do you call
Mm,
it, the supine man, right? So
mhm,
when it comes to these legends, you take a peel back a little bit further, and it turns out that some of these mountains are made out of a stone that's prized because it's this like pink granite,
mhm,
and it's almost like giant's flesh is kind of what what I've come to think of it as, right? Because the Native Americans are like, yeah, that mountain right there, that's a dead giant. And then the geologists go and they're like, this stone is fantastic. We've never seen pink granite like this, right? And it's like,
yeah.
well, maybe there's something there. And
Mm,
at first, I'm like, well, how does a living thing become stone? That's
mhm,
impossible. Like that. How could that be? But actually, happens all the time. It's part of
mm. Yep.
how we sedimentary layers of rock. Not just that, but the Native Americans, they didn't just say that the giant sat down and fell asleep and never woke up. They said he fought a thunderbird and died in battle
Mhm.
and turned into a stone.
For those who wish to find out more about you and your work, where's the best place for them to do so?
Thank you. Yes. MyFamilyThinksI'mCrazy.com is the website. You could search My Family Thinks I'm Crazy on any podcast app and you'll find the show. And Instagram is the app that I use the most to connect with the audience. So if you want to get in touch with me about what you heard on this show or anything else, that's the best place to do it.
Awesome. And I'll have all those links in the show notes. Thanks again, Mark. It's been really cool to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Dara.
Thank you, Mark. I hope you all enjoyed that. Do check out the show notes if you want to find out more about Mark's work. And I'm going to leave it there. I'm Darren Mason, and you've been listening to the Spirit Box Podcast. Talk soon and take care.